Ever had to stand up to someone everyone else feared?
It was the kind of Christmas dinner that every middle-class American family in the Midwest dreads yet pretends to cherish, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of overcooked turkey mingled with the artificial pine from the store-bought wreath on the door. And the conversation flows as unevenly as the cheap Merlot poured into mismatched glasses, all under the watchful glow of twinkling lights strung haphazardly across the living room ceiling in our family's modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of Cleveland, Ohio, a place where holiday traditions felt more like obligatory rituals than genuine warmth, especially when underlying resentment simmered just beneath the surface like the gravy bubbling too long on the stove. Lacy Thompson, a 45-year-old woman who had spent the better part of 2 decades carving out a life far removed from the expectations of my upbringing, sat at the far end of the long oak table that had seen countless such gatherings, my fork poised over a plate of mashed potatoes flecked with lumps that mirrored the knots in my stomach, surrounded by my parents, my 2 older brothers Mark and Todd, my sister-in-law Karen, who always tried too hard with her forced laughter, and my nephew Jake, a lanky 16-year-old with a perpetual hunch from hours spent hunched over his smartphone, his thumbs flying across the screen even as the family droned on about mundane updates from the year gone by, from neighborhood gossip to complaints about rising gas prices that everyone nodded along to without really listening. My father, a retired steelworker whose hands still bore the calluses from decades at the mill, cleared his throat with that familiar rumble that always signaled something uncomfortable was coming, his eyes avoiding mine as he leaned forward, the weight of his words landing heavier than the carved ham at the table's center, declaring in a voice gravelly from years of shouting over machinery and now softened by age that I, his only daughter, would receive no share of the family inheritance because my brothers had earned it through their steadfast presence and contributions to the household over the years, implying that my independent pursuits and frequent absences chasing what he dismissed as fleeting dreams had disqualified me from any rightful claim. A pronouncement delivered so casually amid the clatter of silverware and the distant hum of a holiday special playing on the television in the adjacent room that it felt like just another bite of the dry stuffing, yet it ignited a familiar fire in my chest, one fueled by memories of childhood favoritism where soccer games and fishing trips were reserved for the boys while I was shuttled off to help with baking or sewing, tasks deemed more suitable for a girl in our traditional household. Mark, the elder brother at 50 with his receding hairline and perpetual salesman smirk, let out a low chuckle that grated like nails on a chalkboard, nodding in smug agreement as he speared a piece of meat with unnecessary force, while Todd, 2 years his junior and broader in build from years tinkering in auto shops, simply grunted his approval, his face flushed from the wine or perhaps the unspoken relief that the family's modest assets, the house, a small savings account, and Dad's old pickup truck, would flow their way without my interference, all while my mother fussed needlessly with the serving spoon in the cranberry relish bowl, her averted gaze and tight-lipped smile betraying the discomfort she felt but would never voice, having long ago accepted the patriarchal order that placed sons above daughters in our blue-collar lineage. I absorbed the blow without a flinch, simply nodding as I continued to eat, the flavors turning to ash on my tongue but my composure unbroken, because exploding in anger would have handed them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. And after all these years of silent endurance, I had learned the art of patience, the kind that builds empires in the shadows rather than toppling tables in the light, drawing instead on the quiet strength that had carried me through boardroom battles and late-night coding sessions far from this provincial scene. The chatter around the table faltered into an uneasy rhythm after Dad's announcement, punctuated by the occasional scrape of forks against plates and the muffled laughter from Jake's phone where he scrolled through social media feeds oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant to the undercurrents of exclusion rippling through the room, until suddenly his expression shifted from boredom to wide-eyed astonishment, his whisper cutting through the din like a sharp knife through butter as he leaned toward me, his voice barely audible over the holiday playlist crooning softly from the speakers, informing me in hushed tones that my name had appeared on the Forbes list of billionaires, the figure attached to it staggering in its enormity. A 10-figure sum that represented not just financial triumph, but the culmination of years spent innovating in the tech world with my app development company that connected freelancers across the nation in ways that revolutionized small business. Opportunities. A success I had kept meticulously under wraps from my family to avoid exactly this kind of opportunistic scrutiny. The revelation hung in the air for a split second before the implications sank in, causing my mother's hand to fly to her mouth in a gasp that knocked over her water glass, sending a trickle across the tablecloth like tears unspoken. While Dad's fork clattered to his plate, his face draining of color as the smug certainty evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that the daughter he had sidelined now commanded wealth beyond their wildest imaginations, and Mark's easy grin frozen too. Something resembling panic, his eyes starting to Todd, who sputtered incoherently about how such lists must be mistakes or exaggerations. The entire room falling into a profound silence broken only by the crackle of the fireplace logs in the corner where stockings dangled limply, their contents suddenly seeming trivial in the face of this seismic shift in family dynamics. I allowed the moment to stretch, savoring the reversal not with malice, but with the wry amusement of someone who had long anticipated such a turn, before setting my utensils down with deliberate calm and addressing my father directly. My voice steady and laced with a subtle humor that masked the deeper hurt, remarking that it appeared I would manage just fine without his inheritance after all. But then casually alluding to a long-buried family secret from a decade earlier when he had dipped into the shared savings to bail out Mark's ill-fated car dealership venture without informing anyone, a financial hole I had anonymously filled through a discreet transfer from my burgeoning startup funds at the time, ensuring the family's stability while they remained blissfully unaware of my intervention, a revelation that landed like a quiet thunderclap, turning Mark's cheeks a deep crimson as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, Todd's gaze dropping to his lap in evident shame, and even Dad's posture slumping further into his chair as the twinkling holiday lights cast elongated shadows that accentuated the sudden fragility of his authority in the room. Without another word, I rose from the table, the chair legs scraping against the worn linoleum floor in a sound that echoed the finality of the evening's turning point. Retrieving my wool coat from the hall closet where it hung amid the scent of mothballs and forgotten scarves, bidding a clipped Merry Christmas to the assembled group whose stunned expressions followed me like ghosts, and stepping out into the biting December night where snowflakes danced under the street lamps, blanketing the driveway in a hush that matched the turmoil I left behind, my mind already racing ahead to the implications of this exposure, while a vibration from my phone in my coat pocket drew my attention, revealing a call from my trusted lawyer whose timing was impeccable as always, his voice on the other end confirming that the legal documents for my next strategic move were prepared and ready for execution, prompting me to murmur into the receiver with a resolve sharpened by the evening's events that I was indeed more certain than ever about proceeding. Yet as I slid into my car and the engine roared to life, headlights piercing the swirling flurries ahead, a lingering question tugged at the edges of my satisfaction, wondering whether this confrontation marked the beginning of reconciliation through revelation or merely the spark that would ignite a more profound unraveling of the ties that had bound us so tenuously for so long. That late-night call from my lawyer as I navigated the snow-slicked roads away from the family home replayed in my mind like a stubborn loop on an old cassette tape, his measured tone outlining the next steps in a plan I had meticulously crafted over months to safeguard my assets and perhaps deliver a measure of poetic justice to those who had underestimated me for so long, pulling my thoughts inexorably back to the roots of this resentment that had taken hold in the cramped confines of our family life in Parma, Ohio, a working-class suburb where the streets were lined with modest brick houses and the air carried the faint tang of steel mills on the wind, a place where dreams were expected to stay small and practical, especially for a daughter like me who was 22 and fresh out of a community college program in computer science that my father dismissed as little more than a glorified typing course unfit for securing a stable future in the real world of jobs that paid the bills, without relying on fickle trends like the emerging internet boom that fascinated me far more than the assembly lines he revered. Back then, the favoritism in our household operated like an unspoken law etched into the very walls of our two-story colonial, where Dad would return from his shifts at the mill with pockets jingling from overtime pay that he doled out generously to Mark and Todd for their weekend escapades, funding everything from cases of beer for poker nights to tools for Todd's budding auto repair side hustles that promised to one day turn into the family garage he always talked about, while I received curt nods and reminders to focus on more sensible pursuits like secretarial work or marriage to a reliable provider, my mother reinforcing this divide with her well-meaning but misguided efforts to steer me toward domestic skills through endless afternoons spent learning to perfect apple pies or mend hems on work shirts, her own life a quiet testament to the sacrifices expected of women in our circle who prioritized family harmony over personal ambition, leaving me to nurture my coding passion in stolen hours after dinner when the house fell quiet and I could hunch over my secondhand laptop in the dim light of my bedroom, fingers flying across the keys to build rudimentary programs that connected neighbors for bartering goods in ways that foreshadowed the larger network I would eventually create. The brothers, in their early 20s and basking in the glow of being the chosen heirs to Dad's legacy, coasted through those years with a sense of entitlement that bordered on comical if it hadn't stung so deeply. Mark charming his way into entry-level sales gigs at the local insurance agency where he exaggerated deals to impress Dad over evening meals, and Todd apprenticing at a mechanic shop where he skimmed small parts for his personal projects like souping up beat-up trucks for illegal street races that he bragged about in hushed tones to avoid Mom's disapproval. Their successes celebrated with backyard barbecues and toasts to the Thompson boys making good, while my quiet achievements, like winning a small coding contest that netted a $100 prize I used to buy a better modem, were met with patronizing smiles and questions about when I planned to settle down, fueling a resentment that simmered low and steady, not explosive but persistent, like the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen that never quite shut off. One particularly telling incident crystallized the imbalance during a sweltering summer evening when Dad announced he was cashing in part of the family savings to front Mark's harebrained scheme for a used car lot on the edge of town. A venture that promised quick riches but reeked of overreach from the start, pouring $2,000 into inventory of rust buckets that no one in their right mind would finance without a miracle, and when the checks bounced and creditors started calling, the shortfall hit our household budget hard, forcing Mom to skip grocery staples and me to pick up extra shifts at the diner slinging hash browns to overawed truckers who tipped in loose change, yet instead of accountability, Dad doubled down on defending his sons as the future providers, lecturing me over breakfast about the virtues of loyalty to family men even as he eyed my meager tips with a mix of pity and expectation that I contribute more without question. That betrayal lit the fuse for my first taste of independence, prompting me to pack a battered suitcase with essentials and move into a dingy studio apartment above a laundromat in nearby Cleveland, where the roar of dryers below provided a rhythmic backdrop to my all-night coding marathons. Surviving on ramen noodles and determination as I developed my initial app prototype, a simple tool for coordinating community swaps that flopped hilariously during its first public test when a glitch caused listings to multiply exponentially, flooding inboxes with phantom offers for everything from lawn services to lost pets in a frenzy that had neighbors banging on my door with bewildered complaints, but I laughed it off over solitary cups of instant coffee, turning the failure into fuel for refinements that edged me closer to viability. Amid the isolation, news from home trickled in through sporadic calls from Mom, painting pictures of the brothers' continued missteps, Mark's car lot folding after 6 months with debts piling up, like unpaid parking tickets, and Todd's shop antics involving borrowed inventory that raised eyebrows among his bosses, opportunities one seized for subtle revenge that carried the sting of wit without descending into outright confrontation. Starting with an anonymous tip to the county building inspector about Mark's unlicensed flips on rundown properties where he cut corners on electrical wiring to save a buck, resulting in a hefty fine that forced him to liquidate assets and swallow his pride. When Dad had to co-sign a loan for bailouts, a move I followed up by wiring just enough anonymous funds through a prepaid account to cover the basics, attaching a note that read family looks out for each other, but honesty pays dividends. Leaving him to puzzle over the source while I derived a quiet satisfaction from the irony of my overlooked contributions, propping them up yet again. Those early maneuvers only hardened my resolve, channeling the bitterness into relentless progress as I networked at local tech meetups in dingy community centers. Pitching my evolving app to skeptical investors who eyed my gender and Midwestern accent with thinly veiled doubt, enduring rejections laced with backhanded compliments about my plucky spirit. That made me want to roll my eyes at the outdated notions still clinging to boardrooms like dust on Venetian blinds, yet persisting until a small grant from a women's business initiative provided the seed money to launch a beta version that caught on slowly among freelancers in the Rust Belt, matching skills with gigs in a way that bypassed the gatekeepers who favored Ivy League pedigrees over grit. As the app gained traction, pulling in modest revenue that allowed me to upgrade from the laundromat hovel to a modest one-bedroom in Columbus with actual windows overlooking the river, the distance from family grew both physical and emotional. Holidays reduced to obligatory video calls where I dodged questions about my singleton status, with deflective humor about preferring algorithms to awkward blind dates, but the pull of old ties never fully severed. Resurfacing unexpectedly one crisp autumn afternoon when an envelope arrived in my mailbox bearing Mom's familiar script, inviting me to a family gathering the following month under the guise of Dad's recent health scare that demanded a show of unity. Her words laced with pleas for my presence that tugged at the remnants of loyalty I still harbored despite the scars, leaving me to stare at the invitation on my kitchen table as notifications from my app pinged with new success metrics, wondering if returning to the fold offered a chance for genuine bridge building or merely another arena for the games of favoritism that had defined us for so long. The invitation from Mom lingered on my desk like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave the party, its crisp edges curling slightly under the glow of my laptop screen as I sat in my modest Columbus apartment overlooking the Scioto River where the water churned steadily below. A reminder of the relentless flow that had carried me from the stifling expectations of family back home to this self-forged path of independence that demanded every ounce of focus I could muster, prompting me to shove the envelope into a drawer and immerse myself deeper into the burgeoning world of my App Connect Forge, which by my early 30s had evolved from a clunky prototype into a viable platform connecting freelancers with innovative gigs across the Midwest. A digital lifeline for underdogs like the ones I'd once been, hustling in co-working spaces that smelled of stale coffee and ambition where late-night coding sessions blurred into dawn with only the hum of servers and the occasional ping of encouragement from early users to keep the isolation at bay. At 32, I had traded the laundromat drudgery for a shared office in a converted warehouse on the edge of the city, a space buzzing with other bootstrapped entrepreneurs who traded war stories over vending machine snacks. And it was there amid the fluorescent lights and whiteboards scrawled with algorithms that I poured my resentment into innovation, transforming the pain of familial dismissal into code that empowered others to bypass the gatekeepers who had snubbed me. Drawing on those childhood slights where Dad praised the boys' tangible trades while waving off my tech tinkering as frivolous distractions unfit for a woman's practical role in sustaining the household. The grind intensified as Connect Forge gained modest traction, requiring me to navigate a landscape that mimicked the cutthroat energy of Silicon Valley, but with the gritty realism of Rust Belt reinvention, where funding rounds meant pitching to local venture groups in dimly lit hotel conference rooms filled with skeptical suits who questioned not just the viability of my platform, but my solo status as a female founder without a pedigree from the coasts, enduring their patronizing nods and suggestions to find a male co-founder for balance that I met with wry smiles and sharper follow-up questions about their own biases, all while balancing the books on shoestring budgets that stretched ramen dinners into weeks and forced me to code through fevers in the dead of winter when the office heater sputtered out like an unreliable engine. Humor became my armor in those testing times, surfacing in the absurd near misses that could have derailed everything but instead forged my resilience, such as the disastrous demo pitch in Pittsburgh where my presentation software decided to rebel midway through, hijacking the slides to display a barrage of outdated cat videos I'd once used as placeholders during a late-night debug session, leaving the investors in stitches while I ad-libbed explanations about how even glitches could humanize tech in a world too often dominated by sterile interfaces, turning potential embarrassment into an icebreaker that sealed a small investment deal and left me chuckling over post-pitch beers with my one reliable advisor, a grizzled mentor from the local chamber who called it the perfect recovery and taught me that vulnerability laced with wit often disarmed doubters more effectively than polished perfection. Those moments of levity punctuated the heavier toll of building alone from Marathon weekends, refactoring databases to fend off crashes that threatened user trust, to cold calling beta testers across state lines who hung up on my earnest pleas until one viral feature, a matching algorithm that prioritized local talent for community projects, sparked organic growth, pulling in users from Detroit factories to Cincinnati startups who raved about how ConnectForge democratized opportunities in ways that echoed the American dream my family had reserved only for the son's revenue. Trickling in enough to hire a part-time assistant and upgrade my setup, yet I kept the momentum hidden from home, responding to mom's check-in calls with vague updates about steady progress that skirted the truth of crossing my first million in valuation, wary of inviting the same opportunistic judgments that had colored my youth. As the platform matured, incorporating ethics modules inspired by the brothers' ethical lapses to flag dubious gigs and promote transparent dealings, a subtle satisfaction grew from knowing my creation quietly upended the very systems of favoritism that had marginalized me, but the pull of impending family drama loomed larger with Dad's health invitation unanswered, creating an undercurrent of uncertainty that made every success feel tentative, as if the past could drag me back at any moment. Revenge manifested in those years as a clever undercurrent rather than overt strikes, woven into acts of apparent generosity that carried pointed barbs, like the time I overheard from a mutual acquaintance that Mark and Todd had ridiculed my pie-in-the-sky app nonsense during a family reunion barbecue, dismissing it as a fad for artsy types who couldn't hack real work, prompting me to channel a portion of my latest funding round into establishing a community tech center in the heart of Parma, the old mill district where our family roots ran deep, outfitting it with free coding workshops, maker spaces for local inventors, and even youth programs tailored to girls pursuing STEM paths that Dad had once deemed unsuitable, naming the initiative after Mom in a nod to her quiet endurance without consulting the family first, which ensured the local news coverage highlighted the anonymous donor's impact while subtly shaming the brothers' stagnation through contrasts in the articles that praised the center's role in revitalizing the neighborhood economy. The upstaging was deliciously indirect, watching from afar as Mark grumbled in a follow-up call to Mom about how such handout hubs undercut traditional jobs like his insurance sales, unaware that my platform powered the center's gig matching for volunteers and instructors, effectively turning their mockery into a self-fulfilling irony that boosted enrollments and grants, providing a witty payback that satisfied my sense of justice without descending into pettiness, though it left a twinge of doubt about whether such maneuvers truly healed old wounds or merely widened the chasm with veiled superiority. Yet dilemmas arose to complicate the triumph, testing the boundaries of my hardening resolve in ways that forced uncomfortable reflections on the cost of isolation, particularly one overcast evening when my assistant forwarded a voicemail from Todd, his voice thick with desperation as he detailed the collapse of his auto shop under mounting debts from a string of bad investments tied to those underground races he never quite outgrew, pleading for a loan of $20,000 to keep his family afloat amid threats of foreclosure that tugged at memories of his occasional kindnesses, like the time he defended me against Dad's harsher critiques during my teen years, creating a moral tangle where extending help risked reinforcing the very dependencies I'd escaped while refusing it felt like abandoning the softer side of brotherhood that still lingered beneath the resentment. I paced my office that night, the river view mocking my indecision with its untroubled flow, ultimately opting for a middle path by wiring half the amount through an intermediary account linked to ConnectForge's freelance marketplace, stipulating that he repay it by taking on vetted repair gigs through the app with built-in oversight to curb his shortcuts, a condition that empowered him toward accountability, but also toyed with his vulnerability in a way that made me question if my cleverness bordered on cruelty, especially when his grateful call ended with a hesitant admission of regret over past dismissals that stirred unwelcome empathy. As weeks turned to months with the app surging past 100 million users and Forbes scouts circling my profile like cautious hawks, the family invitation weighed heavier. But a new twist shattered the fragile peace one rainy afternoon when an unsolicited email arrived from an anonymous source, detailing screenshots of Mark's attempts to probe my financials through shared contacts and public records. Evidence of spying that sent a chill through me as I forwarded it to my lawyer, the implications hanging like storm clouds over the impending gathering, leaving me to wonder if their greed had escalated beyond words into actions that demanded a more decisive response. The anonymous email exposing Mark's prying into my finances sat like a coiled snake in my inbox as I steered my way back toward the family gathering in Akron, the wipers slashing rhythmically against the relentless downpour that turned the highway into a blurred ribbon of taillights and reflective barriers. A fitting metaphor for the murky entanglements of blood ties that refused to loosen their grip even as my professional life soared into realms they could scarcely comprehend, forcing me to confront the uncomfortable truth that success, no matter how vast, amplified the echoes of old grievances rather than silencing them, especially now with the Forbes revelation rippling outward like stones skipped across a pond, drawing in relatives and acquaintances who suddenly remembered my name after years of benign neglect. By the time I pulled into Aunt Rita's driveway, the barbecue setup had shifted indoors to her stuffy rec room with its wood-paneled walls and sagging couches that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco from Uncle's long-gone hobby, where the family had clustered around a folding table laden with cold cuts and wilted salads. The string lights now draped haphazardly over a space heater that did little to dispel the chill of unspoken agendas hanging in the air thicker than the humidity outside. Dad propped in a recliner with his cane across his lap, looking friendlier under the harsh fluorescent bulbs, Mom circulating with a pitcher of iced tea that no one wanted, and the brothers orbiting me like planets drawn to a newly discovered sun, their casual overtures laced with a kind of calculated charm that set my teeth on edge, Mark launching into a monologue about his latest real estate flip that conveniently needed just a little seed capital from a visionary like you, sis, while Todd hung back with awkward compliments on my tech wizardry that rang hollow given his history of eye rolls at my pursuits. Jake, ever the perceptive kid, stuck close by my side munching on chips and shooting me sympathetic glances that hinted he sensed the undercurrents of greed bubbling beneath the surface pleasantries. His loyalty a small anchor in the shifting sands of familial opportunism that made me question whether shielding him from the fallout justified the games I was about to play. Revenge in this phase took on a more intricate weave, transforming from distant nudges into deliberate traps that baited their entitlement with the promise of easy gains. Starting with Todd, whom I lured into a private chat on the back porch where rain pattered on the awning like impatient fingers, his fidgeting hands betraying the desperation behind his pitch for reviving his auto shop through a partnership with ConnectForge that would ostensibly integrate repair services into the app's gig network, a proposal I entertained with feigned enthusiasm by suggesting he draft a formal business plan complete with projections and vendor lists, only to subtly forward an anonymized version to a regulatory contact I'd cultivated through the platform's ethics board, uncovering discrepancies in his supplier contracts that mirrored the old inventory skim he thought buried, triggering an audit that hit just as he was gearing up for a loan application, forcing him to scramble with calls to me in a panic that bordered on comical if it didn't tug at those residual sibling strings. I played the benevolent savior by advancing him a modest bridge loan through a subsidiary account, but with clauses that mandated full transparency and profit-sharing tied to verifiable clean dealings. A witty reversal that turned his plea into a lesson in accountability while satisfying my urge for payback by watching him sweat the details he once ignored, though the dilemma gnawed at me when his wife Karen pulled me aside later with tear-brimmed eyes, whispering about how the stress was straining their marriage and affecting little Emma's school focus, making me wonder if my clever machinations spared the innocent or merely collateralized them in the crossfire of old scores. Mark's turn came slicker and more aggressive during the dessert round in the kitchen where pie slices were doled out amid cloying small talk, cornering me against the counter with tales of a distressed property acquisition that screamed opportunity for someone with my resources, his eyes gleaming with the salesman hustle Dad had always praised as the mark of a true Thompson, and I nodded along, even sketching a rough outline of potential app integration for marketing the flip to users, only to quietly instruct my acquisitions team to snap up the parcel through an opaque LLC before his offer cleared, outbidding him by a slim margin that left him fuming in voicemails about unfair market sabotage without suspecting the hand behind it. A satisfying coup that echoed the car lot debacle from years past, but amplified by the scale of my means, deriving a dry humor from the irony as he ranted to Dad about cutthroat competitors while I sipped coffee across the room, interjecting mildly that perhaps diversifying through legit platforms like mine could prevent such pitfalls next time. The light vulgarity of it all amused me in private moments, thinking how their golden boy facades cracked under the weight of their own greed, yet the emotional toll mounted with Jake's quiet confrontation later by the car, his voice dropping low as he admitted overhearing Mark's schemes and questioned if my tricks weren't just hurting the family more than helping, his wide-eyed idealism clashing with my hardened pragmatism and stirring a rare flicker of self-doubt about whether sparing him by keeping my moves veiled truly protected his future or robbed him of lessons in resilience, a dilemma that deepened when Mom enveloped me in a hug at departure, murmuring Dad's regrets over the inheritance slight and begging for a chance to make amends that pulled at the frayed edges of my forgiveness. As the gathering wound down with handshakes that felt more like transactions and promises of follow-ups that reeked of ulterior motives, the atmosphere thickened with the certainty of escalation, confirmed when my phone buzzed en route home with a formal text from Dad summoning me to a private meeting at the house the following week, his words terse and authoritative despite his frailty, declaring it time to settle family matters properly, in a way that hinted at demands rather than dialogue. Leaving me gripping the wheel tighter against the storm-slicked roads as another anonymous alert pinged with evidence of the brothers pitching fraudulent partnerships in my name to shady lenders, the pieces aligning toward a confrontation where my ace up the sleeve could either forge uneasy peace or shatter the remnants beyond repair. The summons from Dad arrived via text as I merged onto the rain-slicked interstate from Aunt Rita's gathering, his words clipped and commanding in a way that belied the frailty I'd witnessed earlier, declaring the family meeting at the old house the following week as an imperative to resolve outstanding matters once and for all, in a tone that evoked the authoritative patriarch of my youth rather than the ailing figure leaning on a cane, compelling me to navigate the downpour with a grip on the steering wheel that mirrored the tension coiling in my gut. Especially as the anonymous alert followed hot on its heels with damning screenshots of Mark and Todd hawking fabricated partnership deals in my name to back-alley lenders who promised quick cash for their schemes, the evidence stacking like accusations in a courtroom drama that I had scripted in my mind, but never fully anticipated would unfold with such raw immediacy, leaving me to ponder during the drive home whether this confrontation would finally exorcise the ghosts of favoritism or merely summon fiercer specters of betrayal that could fracture the already tenuous bonds beyond mending. By the appointed evening, I approached the familiar driveway under a sky heavy with impending snow, the old colonial house glowing with porch lights that cast long shadows across the lawn where Dad's pickup sat rusting like a relic of better days, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against the backdrop of holiday remnants still strung up from Christmas, faded tinsel fluttering in the chill breeze as if mocking the fragility of the peace I was about to disrupt, stepping inside to the scent of Mom's simmering stew that filled the living room where the family had assembled in a semicircle of mismatched chairs, Dad ensconced in his armchair like a judge on the bench, Mark and Todd flanking him with postures radiating false confidence. Mom hovering by the side table with a tray of coffee mugs that steamed unnecessarily in the warmth, and Jake perched on the stairs out of direct sight, but close enough to absorb the proceedings, his presence a silent plea for the mercy I wasn't sure I could extend amid the rising tide of unresolved grievances. Dad wasted no time launching into the proceedings once I settled into the worn couch across from them, his voice gaining strength from the scripted lines he must have rehearsed. Admitting the Christmas dinner blunder with a gruff apology that acknowledged the inheritance slight as a misguided judgment born of traditional biases he now regretted in light of my evident accomplishments. Pivoting swiftly to a proposal for reconciliation through shared prosperity where my resources could bolster the family's ventures, Mark chiming in with polished pitches for joint investments in his real estate flips and Todd's garage revival, their eyes gleaming with the entitlement that had defined our dynamics for decades, painting visions of a united Thompson empire that rang hollow against the backdrop of their recent deceptions, prompting me to lean forward with a measured calm that masked the storm within, beginning by weaving in the subtle clues they had overlooked over the years. From my early anonymous bailouts during their financial scrapes to the quiet funding of community projects that upstaged their stagnation, each revelation landing like pebbles in a still pond that rippled outward to stir discomfort in their expressions. Mark's smirk faltering as I detailed the spying emails and forged lender pitches that my legal team had traced back to their devices, the proof displayed on my tablet like exhibits in a trial, turning Dad's face ashen with disbelief and Todd's gaze dropping in shame while Mom's hand trembled on her mug, her whispered pleas for understanding cutting through the thickening air to remind me of the human cost beyond the scores I sought to settle. The dilemmas intensified in that charged moment, Jake's eyes meeting mine from the shadows with a mix of admiration and apprehension that tugged at the maternal instincts I harbored for him as the one untainted thread in this tapestry of favoritism. His unspoken question about the fairness of my retaliations echoing the internal war I waged between the satisfaction of exposing their greed and the pang of witnessing Mom's tears as she begged for a path to forgiveness that wouldn't destroy the fragile unity she had preserved through silent endurance, a conflict that made even me pause, wondering if my pursuit of witty justice veered too close to the vindictiveness they accused me of in hushed family lore. Yet the momentum carried forward as I unveiled the ultimate twist, the clever inheritance reversal I had orchestrated months prior by acquiring the family home through my trust in a discreet transaction that preempted their expectations. Sliding across the coffee table a set of documents outlining not dispossession, but a cooperative transformation into a bed and breakfast venture powered by Connect Forge, where they would manage operations under strict ethics guidelines to ensure transparency in dealings, earning equity shares proportional to their contributions without a lump sum handout, a structure that flipped the script on Dad's original decree by demanding they earn their place in the legacy just as I had forged my billion-dollar path through grit and innovation. The humor and the irony not lost on me as Mark sputtered about the strings attached that echoed his own manipulative pitches, Todd nodding slowly with a glimmer of reluctant respect, and Dad signing first with a hand that shook not just from age, but from the humbling weight of reversal, the room filling with an awkward relief punctuated by hugs that felt tentative and Mom's grateful sobs that softened the edges of my resolve. As the meeting dissolved into subdued conversations over cooling stew, the snow beginning to dust the windows like a veil over the uncertainties ahead, I slipped out into the night with a sense of closure that carried ambiguity in its wake. Driving away from the house now mine in name, but theirs in stewardship, the phone vibrating with notifications from the app that reminded me of the empire built beyond blood ties, yet the lingering questions haunted the miles home, pondering whether this reckoning had truly mended the fractures of favoritism by enforcing accountability or merely papered over them with conditional peace that could crumble under the first real test, leaving me to reflect on the nature of family as a choice rather than an obligation, one where forgiveness demands vigilance and revenge, however satisfying, risks isolating the victor in a solitude of their own making. The road ahead stretching into darkness that promised no easy answers.